I'm Ann Owen, and I'm a member here at Second Pres, and I'm so delighted that you all came to the conference. And I'm delighted you're in this session with Mark Robertson, one of my environmental heroes. Actually, he's one of my progressive heroes. Mark's, if there's a progressive event or issue connected anywhere throughout the state, Mark's going to be involved in it. And I've just long been an admirer. When I served on the Sustainability Commission for Little Rock, he chaired the commission, so he's just involved in really, sustainability is his middle name, quite frankly. And so I'm delighted to have Mark here and to have him address how to make an impact at home. So with that, I give you Mark Robertson.
Thanks. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Sleepy. I'll keep this real informal. If y'all want to ask questions while I'm going through this, feel free to do so. It's preaching to the choir, a lot of this. I'm going to give you real quick who I am for those of you that don't know me. I'm a landscape architect, land planner, sustainability consultant, horticulturist. I've been involved in land use issues for roughly 40 years plus. Some of the projects that I've worked on around Arkansas that you may have visited, Garvin Woodland Gardens, a lot of the state parks. I've done over 40 state parks in Arkansas. The penguin exhibit at Little Rock Zoo. This is a private residence on your left. Chicago, Lincoln Park Zoo. Whoop, what did I do? Okay. Is there a clicker on this? Pointer? Thanks. Oh man, double fisted here. This we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But these are living roofs on both of those and a living wall. This 2 acres is a completely native landscape. It interprets 4 different biome or ecoregions of the upper Midwest. So I specialize in habitats for animals and humans, zoos in particular. This is Philadelphia Zoo. Our tiger from here now resides, yeah, it's not on this one. Yeah, it's right here. He's in this exhibit. So I just threw these in. This is my front yard. And I think it's important that it's a work in progress. And there's a lot of things that have gone, that have been changed. I experiment a lot. Some of the images I put in here, because we're going to talk about native plants a little bit. I always say use natives with caution. They're not a end-all, save-all. This one right here is a native. It ran all over my front yard from one little 4-inch pot. This is a native here. I've spent years pulling up suckers and seedlings and out of the root. Passion vine, horsetail. I lost 2 trees in my front yard, moved the garden from the back to the front. I think it's important to get out and get in the middle of it. This has been several years ago. This is all urbanite. Broken up concrete. It's salvaged driveways, sidewalks. I've got all over town and picked up pickup load at a time. Ann's son helped me build some of these. Some of them I built. It started out on the ground with just kind of a path. I got where I couldn't weed and get out on the ground anymore, so I moved to these raised beds. I ended up doing a retaining wall next to the street. And then, one thing has moved. I've got a espalier on the front that's not in this one a few years before. So it's an evolution. And I'm telling you that just because that's how I look at projects. Design's never finished. You just run out of time, frankly. It doesn't matter what scale. So this is just kind of, I know you all know this, but I'll just start with that. A real simple definition on sustainability. I suspect everybody can read, so I won't read a lot of these slides. It's characteristic of being able to coexist. We're going to talk a lot about systems. We're part of a natural system. I think it's important for us to understand that we're not apart from the environment. We are part of it, just like honeybees and cutter ants and everything else. We have an impact on the world that we live in. We have the ability to make changes and modify our behaviors and to modify the world around us. But we've got to think of it as a system. They aren't independent pieces. Everything's related. As I tried to organize this for today, became real obvious pretty quick. I couldn't segment it. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth. We'll talk about some of this stuff topically that I'm going to go through. But the reality is every bit of it is related. So these are the challenges I'm going to try and talk a little bit about today, and then some of the solutions to overcome them. I think first and foremost is water. A lot of people talk about energy and fuel, but you can't live without water. You know, our bodies are water. The world is water. We're going to talk about availability. We're going to talk a little bit about quality. Erosion as a result of water and stormwater. Talk a little bit about soil fertility, plant vitality, climate and temperature, and biodiversity. And again, they're all going to be related. So we'll start with water. Just real quick, here's a snapshot of Little Rock on a month-by-month basis of how much rain we get, how much of it's greater than 1 inch, how many days out of the month. So you kind of see where our shortages are. These are averages, so there's variation on them. This is about what we're looking at. One thing I'm not going to talk a whole lot about today is, well, we'll talk a little bit about it. I don't have a slide on it, so I'll just wait till we get there. As a resource, 1% of the total water in the world is available for our use. About 97% of it's salt water, 2% is tied up in the frozen, and 1% of all the water in the world is fresh water. And a lot of it these days is contaminated, polluted, has a lot of issues with it. Groundwater, we'll talk a little about it, and estimated water use in the U.S., about 420 billion gallons per day. There's another slide we'll come to, but on an average, across the board, Americans use about 100 gallons of water a day, plus. And we waste literally half of that. So it's a big, big impact. That's why I start off with water. If y'all haven't read this report, it's about 10 years old now, but it's still very relevant. When Rockefeller Foundation put this out on the state of water in Arkansas, I refer to it frequently. Very little has changed, unfortunately. And what was in there? It's essential for life. It's renewable, but it is finite. It's a closed loop. We're not making any more. Surface water, groundwater, and precipitation are all tightly linked. No substitutes, by and large. Right? There's no synthetic water. There's nothing that requires water. That's about the only thing that's going to serve the purpose. It has social, economic, and environmental value and touches every sector of our lives. Just real down the line, some of the trends since 1980. Again, I think it's important to see where we are, what the challenges are, and then we'll look at some solutions in the spirit of drawdown. What can we do? Groundwater levels are dropping. In Arkansas, especially in the delta regions where we're sucking water out of the aquifers at huge rates, it's a big issue. We're looking at possibly salt intrusion at some point if they continue to drop over time, and then we'll have that 1% is going to get a little bit less as a result of salt intrusion. So we have basically these regions of water zones, if you will. These are some of the high issues: pollution, depletion, flooding, shortages, lack of stewardship, and on down the list. Ineffective leadership is huge. By and large, we've got a lot of leadership that aren't focused on this in a holistic manner. They're looking at special interests primarily when they're talking about water and water plans and water use. So let's talk about what happens when stormwater hits the roof. Traditionally, and this is what the model is for every community that we have across Arkansas by and large. You collect it, you pipe it, you channel it, you remove it from the site, and you let somebody else deal with it. And what that means is we're ending up with this. Or we're ending up with this. We live in a natural system that's made to absorb the water, to infiltrate it, to recharge the groundwater, to slow it down, and our practices are creating these scenarios, and these are becoming more and more frequent. Erosion, it's another issue that we're having as a result of stormwater that's out of control and lack of policy and practices. I bet there's a construction site up the street here. In Arkansas, most residential sites are exempt from having to deal with any kind of stormwater issues. They don't have to put any kind of silt barriers, there's a minimum size that has to be covered. Well, this is what you end up with. And this is what happens at the local level. This is what you start to see moving downstream. And we're losing soil 10 times faster than we're able to replenish it naturally. So, we're losing that very valuable thin layer of topsoil where all the life primarily is. It's got millions of organisms and a tablespoon of good topsoil, and we're losing it. We've got all the non-point source pollution, chemicals, formaldehydes, petroleum products, and the list goes on and on. Battery acid, drips from your antifreeze out of your vehicle that are falling in a parking lot and then going into the drains. You can begin to see what the global impact or regional impact is. This aerial of New Orleans, the little crescent city there. That's the plume coming out of the Mississippi River. And then you literally can see, that edge out in the Gulf, and you can begin to see kind of what's going on along the whole coastal. So what we do locally has a much greater impact. I know you all know that, but I think, again, it's just put it in context. So there are solutions. There's a lot of information out there on how to do things properly versus how it's been done or being done. Looking at where you place structures, how you deal with waste. Over on your right side, just completely ignoring all of that, and it's running off and creating an issue. So one thing we can begin to look at is disconnecting the downspout or capturing the downspout. I just realized on the way over I forgot to put this slide in, but in Little Rock, if you've got say a typical bungalow in Hillcrest, it's a 1,500 square foot little craftsman home over there. 1,500 square feet of roof, you can capture in a normal rain event for a year about 50,000 gallons of water plus or minus comes off that roof over the course of a year. So that's 50,000 gallons of rainwater. By and large, we're piping it and discharging it. So here's an opportunity to disconnect that gutter and capture it and utilize it, or to infiltrate it. One of the simplest things and least expensive is just a simple rain barrel at the end of the gutter. 50-gallon barrel is not going to water your whole yard or your garden for the whole summer, but it'll help. And this is a low-hanging fruit. Reduces the water charges, conserves non-potable water, reduces impact of undesirable runoff. So something this simple can help reduce a lot of the damage that we saw in the previous slides. You can take it up a step and move up into cisterns, and I've designed these for several facilities around the country. You can get into tens of thousands of dollars pretty quickly, depending on how much water you want to capture. But they become a little more involved, and you can do them either above ground or below ground. I just did a cost estimate for a below ground one up in South Fork Nature Center up out of Clinton. They don't have water on the site, and wanted to look at what they could do to use for toilets and gray water use. So I kind of put a little schematic together how they could do it above ground and below ground, and it was running between $3,000 and $7,000 depending upon what solution and how much capacity they needed. Theirs was minimal capacity, so it really helped with the price. I designed one in Toledo years ago, and it was in the neighborhood of $30,000, but we were capturing a whole lot more water. You can bury them, like in the right. You could look at how that you could use them in an aesthetic manner above ground. And these are all possible solutions. These are things you can do at some scale at your own home. I know most of us probably wouldn't have a green roof or a green wall on our homes, but there's certainly opportunities. This can help impact or reduce negative impact on stormwater, on heat island effect, which we'll talk about later on. So there's a number of benefits to these. They've been around for a long, long time. There's various sophistication levels. These are old historic structures in the photo here. Became more of a contemporary practice in the 60s, started in Europe where a lot of this stuff is coming out of. They've been dealing with it a little longer than we have. In Germany, and this is a few years ago, but at that point about 10% of their roofs were in a living roof system.
Mark, what was a vapor barrier back in the old days? Do you know?
I don't know. Pine pitch, could be broad leaves. They didn't have visqueen, so I don't know what they used. And they probably leaked, most likely.
So you took the good with the bad?
Yeah.
The bad was the good.
I mean, we had our sod houses, in this country. They were just cutting sod and laying it on top of poles, and I'm not sure what they were using for barriers. Now it's a very sophisticated system, and there's a bunch of parts, pieces to it. I've designed a few of these in Chicago and Little Rock and other places, but you basically have, you've got to have your structural support, so it's hard to retrofit a lot of buildings if you don't have the right structure for it, so it's really more suited for new construction. But you've got your vapor barrier, waterproofing, if you will, insulation, water capture. These three-dimensional cells here help hold water. Most green roofs, if they're designed properly, will capture the first ½ inch to 1 inch of rainfall that falls on it and hold it, either as it's taken back up through the plants or it slows the release down dramatically, so it lessens the load on the stormwater. Capture and retain high percentage annual precipitation, reduces runoff, helps regulate temperature. I've got a photo, I think it's the next slide or two, but Chicago City Hall is probably one of the two most famous green roofs in the U.S. What's interesting about that one is, here it is. So this is Chicago City Hall. The backside is the county. So the county didn't put a roof on. So what makes this really interesting is you can do data on basically the same roof and the same location with and without. But this is one of the most well-known, and I've been up on this one. It's pretty incredible to be up on the top of this. There is no safety edge. So it's really unusual to get an opportunity to go up there and out on it. But these will nearly double the life of your roofing membrane. It greatly reduces your temperature on your structure, which means it lowers your heating and cooling costs. You don't necessarily get true insulation benefit from it, but you're reducing your heat buildup, basically. You're steering it away from your attic or from your roof. You get biodiversity. There's beehives up here, there's birdhouses, there's A lot of data is collected on how much birds and butterflies and other insects can live at 18 to 20 stories off the ground. And what we're finding in some of these roofs is pretty interesting. It can be something as simple as this. I actually designed a roof like this for downtown Little Rock about 10 years ago. It never got built, but it was very, very similar to this. About this size, mainly planted, some outdoor seating and social areas. You know, I was disappointed they didn't build it, but we did design it for them. So here's the other giant living roof that people don't realize. Millennium Park in Chicago. This is about 10 acres. There's rail yards below it, multiple levels of parking below it. But that's all a constructed garden and roof on structure below it. It's several stories deep below the surface. You've got the beam, you've got the amphitheater out here. There's interstate here that's run under it, train yard that runs under it. But folks don't recognize or equate that as being a living roof or a green roof, but it really is. So there's about 10 feet of fill in some areas of that. And it's built up with like foam and modular pieces, so it's not 10 feet of soil necessarily.
Which side's the lake on?
Lake is right there.
The lake's out there, okay.
So this is Michigan Avenue right here, or right here.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Hancock Tower.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So here's more at a residential scale. I'm looking at building a shed or studio in my backyard, and I'm looking at something like this. You know, it may only be a couple hundred square feet, 160 square feet, 8 by 20 roughly. I want to do it just so people can see it can be done, if for no other reason. But gardening, vegetable growing, you know, these are all on homes or on garages or outbuildings at a residential scale. So there's opportunity there. If you want to pursue it on an existing structure, get a structural engineer to see what you got. So.
On something with a pitched roof, all you're going to have is water runoff. How do the plants get to retain any water?
Well, if you're using those matrix, even in there, there's pockets.
Okay.
So it holds the water, but if you'll, this is about a foot deep of soil, and here
really?
you can see the end here. So that's about a foot of soil. That's probably a foot of soil.
Okay.
I mean, those are pretty steep.
That's true.
And a lot of it's what are you going to grow on it? So a lot of green roofs use sedum. Sedum are shallow rooted.
Yeah,
They can grow in 2 to 3 inches. Not soil, but growing medium. A big difference. It's an engineered soil replacement, if you will. It's part of the system. You can see it kind of riding through here. So they'll take and blast clay and shale at high levels, and it puts a lot of, explodes them basically, and creates a lot of air within it, but as well as faceted edges, so it'll help hold moisture and nutrient. In maintenance,
Oh, that's wonderful.
they require maintenance. You can't just put them in, plant them, and leave them. So there's the simple way. So this is a green wall that I designed in Chicago. There's 2 types of walls that we're talking about. This one is a freestanding. It sets about 4 feet off this glass wall, which is a west-facing wall, which is the worst possible from a heat perspective. This is the Children's Zoo at Lincoln Park. And this is a good solid 2 stories, it's nearly 30 feet tall. This is a riparian grape that I had the landscape company go out and collect and propagate. It's a native grape from that part of the country. defoliates, so in the winter when you want the light to get the solar warmth, this all comes off, the leaves all fall off, the sun comes in. When you're inside the building, which again, I took that photo out, I don't know why, I was trying to shorten this thing from 200 slides down to 80s. It's like being in a treetop. You get this light coming, through the, you get a little sense of it here. This was 6 months after it was planted, this picture on the right. This was the first winter. And then the thing that, this is a rain collection trough here on the front. So the water, the way this roof is designed, the water comes down, runs down the trellis, and then goes into this infiltration bed that the grapes planted in. And this was all done to help offset stormwater. They've got a shared sewer system, so sanitary and stormwater all goes into the same pipe, which is common in a lot of cities. But you can imagine what the impact is when those things flood and back up, and your manhole covers are popping off. So places like Chicago, which is probably one of the leading cities in the country that's doing living roofs, it's to help deal with the stormwater and reduce it, because they can't get in and replace a lot of those sewer lines. So this is one way they've come up with dealing with it. The other wall is actually living on the building face itself. These are in Europe, but there's some strategies you can use for growing plants on vertical walls. I've seen vegetable gardens on vertical walls, herbs. Actually, I'm working with a homeowner right now to do a vertical herb garden on a 6-foot privacy fence. It's the only place they got enough sunlight to grow some kitchen herbs, so that's what we've come up with for it. Another thing that we can look at in our neighborhoods on the stormwater issue is these next few are important, but here's the right-of-way. We see this all over Little Rock or Central Arkansas, and they converted it to this. So this basically is capturing the runoff from the street and the sidewalk, putting it into this bioswale, rain garden, infiltrates, slows it down. They're another city that has shared sewers, and this is one way to cut the amount of stormwater going into their sanitary system. We could do this all over Little Rock. It'll take some policy leaders to make something like that happen.
They're doing it downtown, right?
They did it in
A few blocks.
few blocks of it, and there's some issues with what they did downtown.
Oh, really?
This is an elementary school in Portland. This has become an outdoor classroom. This neighborhood, the reason I put it in, while it's a school, it's still applicable for a homeowner. The residences all around the school were having problems with flooding in their basements, and again, it's that mixed sewer system, so you can imagine what they were getting in their basements. It was going to cost a huge amount of money to go in and replace all the hard pipe lines. So one of the things they did was look at these kind of strategies, and in the school in particular, eliminated a lot of the parking lot and the hard surface areas, and the flooding has gone away in those homes. Here's one that I did at ADEQ, our Department of Environmental Quality in North Little Rock, just using native plants, infiltration basins in their parking lot. Put the wrong one down. Some strategies in more urban areas are these narrow sections. Again, this is in Portland. This is kind of like what was done in downtown Little Rock. You see more of this going on up in northwest Arkansas in particular. But taking just these narrow strips between the street and the sidewalk and converting them into a living biofilter, bioswale, if you will, that's capturing the stormwater. It's creating an area for more biodiversity. It helps with heating, cooling the city down. Here we are back again in Portland. This was an experiment they did where they did bump outs. So they took this residential street and on that kind of what would be a no parking zone typically anyways on the corner, they just extended the curb out and created these basins. And here you can see the water's running in, it captures it, slowly infiltrates, and it takes it out of the sewer. Again, these are all things we could be looking at. Here, you could be looking at in front of your home, potentially. So these soaking trenches is another strategy. You're catching it, you're running it in, and you're doing an infiltration trench that's basically gravel filled, dealing with your stormwater. This is more typical of what you probably would see people using, big river rock, and that's just catching the water. This is one I actually designed in Hot Springs last year. This is in the daytime, and this is at night. But it's the same principle. Underneath this trench is this pipe. This is sea glass. And I did LED lighting in it. So it looks like it's a water channel, if you will, with the blues and the greens. But it's dealing with the stormwater coming off that downspout right there and running through this garden. And it has an infiltration underneath it. So. Rain gardens, this is, if y'all garden in your home, this is something everybody could be doing at some part of their yard. It doesn't have to be big, and it all adds up, so every little piece helps. You can see where the water's come into these, and again, you've got that basin underneath with the soils that's been changed up and some percolation. You could do a more stylized version, like this more formal landscape here, or something like this little island out in the middle of the lawn. I mean, so we can look any number of ways, just depending on what your aesthetic might be. There's a lot of options, and all simple things that you could do. You've got to excavate and replace the soil that's in there with something that's more permeable. We have so much clay in this area that you really have to think about what the soil mix is. Another thing we can do to reduce stormwater is our drives and walks. Pavers, you can either do gravel in those voids, or you can plant turf in them if you want a softer look. Here's one with sea glass in it. Again, it allows water to move through those pavers and down below. That's a permeable paver there. Has a more traditional look to it, but those are interlocking. Water hits it and runs down those joints and into a substrate below. So we could replace our patios, our driveways, our sidewalks at our homes with it, or we can certainly do it at a municipal scale as well. The roundabout at Pine Valley put some of these in. They were supposed to get buffalo grass in them, but that didn't happen. So I think they're just filled with gravel and weeds at this point. Driving strips. That's kind of going back a few decades, but still, do we really need a 8-foot or 10-foot or 12-foot concrete slab? This is one way to minimize the wear and tear by keeping a driving strip, but then doing the grass or something in between those that actually lets the water through. Here's a bark and mulch drive or road. Here's a gravel. Here's the idea of grass in between pavers. So starting to think about some of our traditional approaches to landscape differently. You can still walk on this. See, that's a walk there, but allows water to move through it. Be water wise. Leaky faucet. One drip, one small drip, equates to about 3,000 gallons in a year. Just that drip, drip, just that infrequent. Again, we talked about 100 gallons a day plus, average waste of about 50%. This one here, I forget how many gallons, but if you're brushing your teeth and leaving the water running, it adds up real quick, and there's that little single drip. So those are things we can do. They're all within our reach. Doesn't cost us anything. So one of the big uses of water is irrigating our yards, our landscape, our gardens. This is the more traditional method that a lot of people recognized, pop-up spray heads, rotor heads, highly inefficient. I have moved to all my projects now using this product in this method for irrigating lawns and beds. This is more efficient than this. This is another method that I've used this a lot in my garden out front, but I'm moving to this year. What I like about this one, this is a product that was developed in Israel. It's manufactured in Fresno, I think it is, in California. It's called Netafim, and these emitters are sized for precise release of water, either a ½ gallon per minute or 0.7 or 1. So you can customize your layout based upon what your water needs are. You can customize the spacing between those emitters, and they're actually fused inside the ½ polyethylene pipe. What I like about this product in particular is this copper oxide, this cupron emitter. It's anti-root intrusion. So if you look at Toro, I think it is, they use our herbicide in their root-free drip systems. This is just a natural product that's embedded as part of the emitter, and it's got about a 20-year, I believe it's a 20-year warranty on root intrusion on it. So it just naturally repels roots from going into that emitter and clogging it.
What did you call this again? What did you say this is called?
This particular product is called Netafim, Netafim, and Techline is the product. They are a big manufacturer of big ag, as you might imagine. That's kind of what their forte is, but they've got a residential line, which is this. And if anyone's water critical, it would be Israel. But this can save about 60% of your irrigation water over this. So let's talk about that 60% for a minute. You know, we've heard, I'm not going to talk much about energy. Energy is involved in all of this. But on water, California, for example, over 50% of the expensive water is tied up in energy that it takes to move it, treat it, and put it back out. I think in Little Rock, we're somewhere in the 30%, 35% range. One, our energy's less expensive. We don't have to transport our water so far. But it was shocking to me. I was a finalist to sit on the board for Central Arkansas Water, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago. As part of my interview, I started talking about water conservation and what I thought the mission of the water district ought to be. And I was told right away by somebody on the board, Mr. Robertson, you understand we're in the business to sell water, not to save it. You remember that, don't you? You were there.
Yeah.
How long ago was that? 5, 6 years ago?
Something like that. They've changed their thinking since then, though.
That's good.
They're more into conservation.
But energy is a huge piece of it. I mean, just their energy savings from water reduction means you have to put fewer treatment plants in and all the way down the line. So everything's connected. So that's good to know that there's been a shift.
Yeah.
I was hoping that would be the case, but I about fell over when they interrupted me and I was talking about that.
So Mark, can the average homeowner install that drip system themselves, or do you need to hire somebody to do that?
I guess it depends on your skill level. I should have put a diagram in there. It's not overly complicated. The other thing I like about this is you can put it up to 8 inches below the surface of the soil, which is ideal because the capillary action of the water, it will actually move vertically up from 6 to 8 inches. So you're putting the water at the source down where the root is. You're not watering sidewalks. You're not watering foliage. So, you know, this is going to help you reduce water, reduce fungal issues within the plants. It's a closed loop, so, and it's a low pressure, low flow. So basically, you've got a main water line that comes in. You've got a pressure regulator that it goes through that reduces that water down to I think it's like 15 pounds, and it's really a low pressure. And then you're just connecting the pipe, but you want to connect it back so it's not going out and dead end, and it's tied back into a full loop so you get the full pressure throughout. And then you just use a big wire staple, like a bent coat hanger basically, stick it in the soil to hold it in place, and then you lay your mulch over the top of it. The last two projects that I've specified this for, I'm asking them to trench it 4 inches below the finished soil surface. So it'll be 4 inches below the surface of the soil, and then 3 to 4 inches of mulch on top of that. So,
Could it be used for gravity fed? You know, I've got 750 gallons of water raised up a little bit, and I'm wanting to do a drip irrigation for a garden.
you know, I'm not sure, Frank, because it's got to have a minimum pressure on it to
So
run.
I might have to
through
put a
the line.
little,
You might have to put a
solar
little
pump
booster
and then-
pump or something on it.
yeah,
But it's
Bring
not
it
the
up.
same as having to put a high pressure well pump or something
Right.
like that on it. So
okay.
my gut tells me you probably have to put a small booster on it just to get adequate pressure that you could solar operate. So.
Mhm.
So soil is another key component. These are just some real quick diagrams. I mean, we're talking about pH range, soil particle, clay, loam, or sand, which are the three building blocks of soil. Get to know this one up here if you're not familiar with it, UA extension. I was at a home a couple days ago and you know, take some soil samples, send it to the lab, get your free soil testing done, find out what you have. Here's a report. This happens to come from Tennessee. I never could find one online of U of A, but it's the same deal. It'll tell you what your micronutrients are, what your organic matter in your soil is, what your pH level is, which is very, very important. pH determines how much of your nutrient actually can be taken up by the plant. So if you've got an acidity of 4.5, which would be real similar to what's out in the Ozark woods, 4.5 to 5, 71% of your fertilizer never gets utilized. It just leaches out and goes downstream. If you're at 6.5, which is basically the neutral, the center zone, you have 100% availability of your 3 macronutrients, 0 waste. So adjusting your pH allows you to get full benefit of whatever input you're putting into your soil to feed your plants. So here with this one, I can't read it, my eyes are a little funky this morning, but here's kind of telling you what's apply lime here and what the deficiencies of some of the micro are here. But this is a real important piece. You should do this every year. And I confess I don't. But honestly, this is something that I should start doing annually, finding out what I have on an annual basis so that I can adjust my inputs. Even if it's organic inputs, so I'm not wasting it and it's fully available to the plants. But that's a building block on soil.
Mark, we just got a few more minutes. Do you want to field any questions
Sure.
before we end? Or
Yep.
do you have some more points you wanted to make before that? Or just wanted to give you a heads up?
Compost, we talked a little bit about today. This is one way that you can build your soil up. I'll talk about this one just real brief. You're looking for about 5% organic matter in your soil. If you're buying soil, this is important that it's gone through rigorous testing. Look for a certified soil, and this would be a commercial, and these are, of course, ways that you can do it at your own home. Protect your soil. Mulch, these are the ones I normally look at organic mulch, but some options are like glass or stone. You don't get a lot of moisture retention out of these two like you do with these two, and you're really getting no nutrient breakdown from stone or glass that you are from the organic. It helps with erosion. It helps keep your water use down as well. So. Biodiversity, habitat creation. You look at a certified wildlife habitat backyard. I mean, you're looking to provide 4 basic water, shelter, housing, food. There's backyard habitats. National Wildlife Federation has got a program that you can go online and look at, and it spells it all out. Mason bees, pollinators. This one I'll just buzz through it. Basically, we're heating our cities at a tremendous rate. Some things you can do is plant trees and shrubs, cover your parking lots with shade cover. Look at reflective roofing and coating services, high albedo concretes if you're doing walks that help reflect instead of absorb the heat. Drought tolerant. My point on this one is a lot of people think, well, if I just put natives in, I don't have to worry about it. I always try to tell folks, think about where that native is growing naturally. It's got a microclimate that it's living in, that it's thriving in, and too often we try to put a native in a setting that it's not suited for. And they still are going to need water to establish at a minimum. But I used to have this argument with the highway department a lot that were requiring natives in downtown streetscapes. And you just don't typically see plants growing in asphalt and high heat. So there's just a lot of plants out there that we can be using, a lot of them you know. Those are all the obvious ones. Red buckeye is one of my favorite small ornamentals. I use this one a lot now. It's about a 10 to 15 foot tree. It's native throughout most of, or at least all of southern Arkansas. American smoke tree, really nice flower. A chinkapin oak, American beech, those are all parts of Arkansas, those are grown. Shrubs, the itea or the sweet spire, native azaleas.
Azaleas the native?
Pardon me?
Okay, it's the native azaleas, not the,
Yeah, this is the pinkster bloom, the native, the deciduous.
yeah.
Buttonbush, St. John's wort, those all grown parts of Arkansas. Coneflower, we all know, that's my front yard. Black-eyed Susan, Coreopsis, Liatris or blazing star. But here's some that you may not know that could be used depending on the conditions. Muley grass, it's a drought-tolerant native grass. It looks beautiful and massing. It's got this real nice pink seed head on it. Ferns and shade. You know, here's what ADQ did look like until they started mangling with their maintenance regime. This was shortly after I took that 10 acres and actually made a natural habitat out of it. Here's the green roofs and the 2 acres. Invasive plants is a big topic. A lot of it's just about managing and thinking about what you're planting. Ecoregions. Natural pest control, manual removal. This one I wanted to point out real quick. Everyone thinks about the ladybug, but you really want the larvae. They're the ones that are the voracious eaters of the bad guys. And you want to get these that are lab grown, not wild collected. So look to buy the larva, not the mature beetle when you're buying those. And then there's all kinds of home remedies, and that's it.
Are you going to be able to hang around for a while in case you have a lot of questions? Excellent, thank you.